This is Series 2, Meditation 3, continuing with our consideration of that part of the Mass that is the recalling of our spiritual tradition. But then we have to think more carefully than we usually do, I think, about how universal that truly is, how truly Catholic, in the sense that Abraham went to Melchizedek for his blessing. And Melchizedek was a king for sure, but he certainly was no Christian, certainly not a Catholic or Orthodox, and not a Jew. So he's one of those ancient religions upon whose shoulders we stand. And then there's the figure of the Magi, who are similar figures representing the wisdom traditions of old. And then I have introduced Raymond Panikar, who was certainly my spiritual teacher for 30 years, but also a man of his own repute that has influenced many in the ways of true religion. Religion of compassion, a religion of identification with the Holy Spirit. Panikar was famous for going to India after 20 years a priest and as a Catholic, and returning a Hindu and a Buddhist and a Catholic even more than before, because it's our interaction, our engagement with these other traditions, or great traditions or small traditions, that have their roots in the truth as well. The Holy Spirit has engaged to produce those symbols of deity that guide people of goodwill, guide people in love with the holy. Now, when we think of these terms, we have to open our minds and hearts to being changed. But not just changed in any sort of way, changed in a way that will make us better at what we are. Better Catholics, better Buddhists, better Hindus. In the way of Gandhi, who was Hindu and Muslim and Christian, for one who has truly realized the divine spirit. These things are possible. I've come all this way from the other side of town in order to show you this painting, because I wanted to introduce a new element to our consideration about the presence of God and the action of grace in this world. And note that this is a painting I made in the early 70s, and it had this consistent, and there were about 100 examples from this series, and there was this consistent counterpoint of amorphic, colorful space against these geometric, hard-edge, hard-line embellishments within. There's another example that we'll use later on for this sort of consideration, but I wanted to focus on this aspect of the human perception of being, of us and the divine spirit, of us and our environment that the Spirit has created for us as we go along with our liturgy of readings in the patterns of the Mass. Now, we're back on Corfu, and our whole group, there's 5 to 7 people in this group, gathered near that hill of those really vile energies in another place that wasn't like that at all. It was a peaceful little valley. And we spent the night there reading the scriptures, certainly the Catholic scriptures, the Christian Christian scriptures, but then also from other traditions of wisdom and compassion. And then even a greater consideration comes into this, because I mentioned that I'm wearing this shawl of a tantric priest, and the marvelous insights of that kind of both Buddhism and Hinduism, but I particularly studied the Buddhist patterns in this regard. My root guru, was an abbot from a monastery in North India, and he guided me in the ways of initiation as I studied religious initiation, and the doctrines of the Dzogchen, if somebody wants to look it up, were what guided my those deepest studies of Tantric Buddhism, and in the greater tradition of Mahayana Buddhism, its relationship with Zen, which is where I started out in my studies of Buddhism. And finally, I felt free to return to my own tradition when I had discovered that at the heart, Tantric Buddhism is the same as Zen Buddhism. They have this method of discovering the innate and ineffable core of our being. And having once found that still pool, not only is one refreshed, but one is engaged even more deeply in all the levels of reality that we experience. So if we start with this basic consideration of the particular developments of our own construction against this vast cosmic display that God has provided for the drama of our lives. And then we move on to specific periods in human development, in evolution, if you like, of the continuing refinement of insight and the interchange between various traditions to produce these new levels of insight. So, my friends and I spent that night there on that north end of Corfu, up there on the sides of that great mountain, and considered these things of which we speak. And one of them, and I decided that it was part of that night's meditations to go back in the dark to this place of vile energies as a challenge to in our spiritual quest. And the two of us there had experiences that are beyond description. One cannot describe the encounter with the ineffable sometimes, and well, seldom. And this was one of those occasions before we returned to share these energies that were now pumping through us in such a beautiful and engaged way. Imagine us there on that island, the same environment as the Iliad and the Odyssey, though that was on the other side of Greece, and much of it anyway, and one gets that sense where one could encounter deity in those fashions as they did, as I've already described to you to some degree. And imagine us as our own considerations percolate through the whole being that God has created in us. It's not enough just to follow a list of rules to be a good religious person, to be a successful religious person. One has to allow those occasions in our life that transform, metanoia, and that is what we call down from heaven itself for the whole world at this time of such great need. We will continue with these considerations in another locale with another painting that describes a similar environment.